Today, my topic is going to be a smorgasbord of items, but it starts and ends with Peter Drucker. As I was thinking about Peter Drucker, my favorite author and the only business author besides Dale Carnegie that I agree with 100% of everything he writes. Um, I was mistakenly thinking that he was famous in the 50s for helping transform Japan from a destroyed country where we nuked two of their cities, destroyed nuclear bombs on two of their cities, and destroyed the country and the economic power of the country and the morale of the country, and they were rebounded. And by 1960s, they were the second best economy in the world. And I was mistaken. That was Edward Deming. But in the process, I had an off thought about one of the things that I think differently, or that I think about that I don't discuss very much, and others don't too, is that I have such respect for countries that were devastated during World War II. The top, for example, Japan, as I mentioned, they became number two temporarily in the world. Of course, today that's China. Also, Germany completely destroyed. I wonder how many hundreds of thousands of millions of bombs were dropped on Germany, and of course they were taken over, divided into two countries. They were occupied by three or four different forces after the war, and they're one of the top 10 economies in the world, I think top five. And so just amazing how they came out of such massive destruction, and within tens of years, 10, 20, 30 years, they became powerful countries. Uh, Also, Israel, Israel with only 5% or 10% of the population of those countries, they're just a great country and a leader in the world in so many ways. My favorite fiction book ever is called Exodus by Leon Uris, and it's about how Israel rose from nothing and became a great country. And then I have to reluctantly, because it doesn't require to be good or humane to succeed in business or to in growth. But China has they get little publicity about how bad their situation was during World War II. They were occupied for 10 years by the Japanese. And while the Holocaust gets tons of publicity every year and has, as long as I've been alive, very few people talk about the decimation and the evil things that transpired under the Japanese occupation. Probably, certainly in numbers, far greater than what happened in Germany. They killed many more prisoners of war and civilians and rapes, and they demolished the country. And China rose out of that and became second in the world today in terms of their economy. I believe, looking ahead, that India, that I believe that in 20, 30 years, India will come back and be bigger than China and the United States. So I see a world 30 years from now where it's India, China, and United States. But having said all that, as much as I admire all those countries, obviously the greatest economy and the greatest people in the world for the last 50 years have been in the U.S. And one more subset of that is I have to incredibly admire what's happened in the U.S. Hispanic population. That's really, really grown the not only the number of people, but the economy has grown dramatically over the last 10 to 20 years. So if we look at economies over the last 5 or 10 years, maybe 3 to 5 years, it's the biggest economy, the fastest growing is the US Hispanic GDP. It's growing faster than the rest of the US. It's growing faster than China, faster than Germany, faster than Japan, faster than virtually anyone in the world. They're now that GDP of the Hispanics in the United States is 3.7 trillion estimated, which would make it the fifth largest GDP, gross national product, gross product in the world. And compared to that's bigger than Spain, which is 2.7, Mexico, which is 1.5, and it's much more difficult to for us as Americans to ride the wave of the growth in other countries, in China, even in China, and it's very difficult. But there's an opportunity in the U.S. that doesn't exist anywhere in the world, and there is no company that's done a tremendous job of marketing to Hispanics. So while we're trying to tap that into that with ATAX and that initiative, we still need to do a better job of riding that exciting growth and participating in that and serving that community. But having said that, that's where my mind went when I was thinking of Peter Drucker, and he's just the greatest, one of the greatest minds ever in business. And one of the things he did when I was researching him this morning is he one of the things something that separated him from his colleagues was he looked at the relationship of human beings versus the crunching of numbers. And I think, and that makes me think of all the problems I've had with private equity and all of the, from when I watch private equity, and while they've done many good things, one thing they don't do well is management relationships of human beings. They go after the numbers versus without going after the human side of it. And there's no long-term, if you focus on the numbers, you can't ever win in the long run. You have to start with the human component of that. And Drucker was a master. So I'll take you first to my favorite Drucker book. It's called The Effective Executive, and I'm my version is of what my favorite part of the book is probably colored, and if you read the book, you'll see the real story. But if you keep telling a story, then it gets more and more colorful and less like the original story. Sort of like the man caught the fish, and then every time he told the story, the fish got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, that maybe my coloring of my favorite story might have that characteristic. So be careful. But the point is the same, and I use my color to try to make the point, to drive home the point of what I learned from the story. And what happened is, in the book, Drucker focuses on the fact that people with great strengths have great weaknesses. And he said people that the opposite of that is people that try to avoid weakness, try to solve their weaknesses. They end up mediocre, and they end up not accomplishing anything. So his point is, you have to hire and train and utilize people's strengths, and hopefully you can manage to put up with their weaknesses as part of the process, or but if you go to people and say, you need to, if you go to Babe Ruth and say, think of Babe Ruth, for example, maybe greatest home run hitter ever, one of them for sure. And let's say that he was a bad bunter, and I don't know if he was or not, but he was. So they could spend hours every day teaching him to bunt when he was the best ever. Certainly in his lifetime, he was the best home run hitter ever, and there were tons of great bunters. But if he spent his time, instead of focusing on honing his home run skills, if he spent his time on honing his skills in bunting, then it would have never been the Babe Ruth story. And so or Drucker tells a story of Abraham Lincoln. He loved using, in his books, he loves using stories about the military. And that's one of his favorite ways to tell a story. And apparently the first general, I think it was McClellan in the Civil War, he was one that didn't want to show weakness, didn't want to make a mistake, and didn't swing for the fences. He wanted to learn bunting. And so even though the North in the war had huge advantage in number of guns, number of soldiers, number of horses, number of cannons, etc., then he just sat and didn't do very much, and sat for about a year. Meantime, Robert E. Lee, General of the South, is running around winning skirmishes and battles, and he's not going to go to where the Northern Army is headquartered and attack them. They're way outgunned. So he's winning battles, small battles, and gaining ground, and they're winning the war. And finally, Lincoln fires him and hires another general. And apparently, he didn't learn his lesson well enough, or the next general he hired didn't understand what he was supposed to do, because he didn't bring the battle to the end. And so after 3 months, Lincoln fired him, and he hires Ulysses S. Grant. And Grant just goes out and attacks, and then he loses some, wins some, but we're beginning to win the war because we have superior forces, and of course we were in the right. And apparently Grant had a drinking problem, and Congress eventually sends a letter to Lincoln and said, Ulysses S. Grant is an embarrassment to the country, to the army, you have to fire him. And he's shooting his guns at nights and hollering and swearing, and he's an embarrassment to embarrassment to manhood. I mean, he's just a bad person. And so Lincoln ignores them, and finally a contingency of congressmen come to meet with Lincoln, and it's both parties. So, and they're meeting with Lincoln, and they say, Mr. President, please, Grant he has his dog with him. He's firing his guns into the air at night. He's yelling and screaming and swearing, and he's not a gentleman. He's not someone that can be respected. We need to get rid of him, and please fire him. And Lincoln called his secretary over, and of course, it was a male secretary in 1863. He said, James, he said, find out what brand of liquor Grant drinks and buy a barrel for each of my generals. And Congress went out. The committee from Congress scurries out and never came back. And the point of the story is that you hire for strengths and you're either winning or losing, and he was winning, and you have to decide if you can put up with the weaknesses and if he ever went too far. Now, if he had gone too far, I mean, he was certainly close to being fired. If he had, I'm certain that if he had killed a someone shooting late at night, in or and even if he didn't kill him, if he shot someone and injured them late at night doing his drunken tirades, that would have been over the top. But you have to decide if the behavior of the person that's a superstar is something that you can put up with or not. And so I love that lesson, I and I certainly admit that I've been blessed with some great strengths, and therefore I have to admit that I have great weaknesses. And a lot of people that know me see me as cocky and don't understand that I very much understand my huge weaknesses. And so that was one lesson, that it's okay to have weaknesses, that it's okay not to spend any significant time on focusing on stopping those weaknesses, because then I can't do what's good. And one of the ways I use that, for example, is that I see most people I know in their homes, they'll do things. They'll help around the house. They'll cook, or they'll clean, or they'll take out the garbage, or they'll mow the lawn, or they'll do things to save money, or to some people even thinks it shows love for your significant other if you're doing those kind of things. But I hate those things, and I realized that I hate the thought of cooking. I've never turned on. Not only have I never turned on my stove, I've never turned on the burners on top of the stove. And if I was spending time learning how to cook, then it was something I don't even enjoy, then I hate it, then that's going to take away from focusing on and doing what I do best and what I'm really good at. And so I hire all of that away. And I realized that enables me to have less downtime, that I can spend more hours focused on what I do best. And part of what you should be doing, as those of you that are CEOs, or many of you are entrepreneurs, and all of you should be thinking about the future and envisioning. It allows me to spend more time on focusing on what I do best. And so I think that that's a great lesson from Peter Drucker. And another thing that came out of that thinking was that when I think of all the people I know and all the executives I've ever worked with and all the people I've spent time with, I think 95% of the people I've worked with in my companies would have been in that committee asking to have Grant fired. I think only a few percent, less than 5% of people can get to a Lincoln level that they can understand that what the goal is and what the real goal is, and understand that the path to that goal is. And most get caught up in finding errors and weaknesses. I think so many people, it's so easy to find weakness in everyone and find mistakes that people make and what they do poorly. That's really easy to identify, and but it's much more difficult to put that aside and say, what is this person best at? I haven't, in my whole life, I haven't heard 1% of the time someone came to me with an analysis of another human being, and they said, this person is really good at this, this, and this. It's 99% of the time or more. It's this person did this wrong and this wrong, and they're weak at that, and they're weak at that. There's so little time spent on the proper focus. That is what is that person best at, and how can we partner with them and help them hone that skill, and how does that fit into our organization? But again, don't get me wrong, that if their weakness is too offensive, you have to get rid of them. Even though there could be a value to the even if he's winning the war and he was doing a great job, if he was shooting at night and injuring human beings, then and he shot people, then he would have to then let go. So there is that. They can go over the top, and they often do. But in the meantime, you have to identify what you can put up with to achieve greatness. So one of his phrases is, and sort of related to what I just said, is and I recommend everyone. You don't have to read his books. You go online and say Drucker quotes, Peter Drucker quotes, and they're just, you can get hundreds of them, and I agree with 100% of them. But part of what I just said about not doing things you're not good at, he says, do what you do best. And as company, he says this for companies, and I take it down to people should do this too. Do what you do best and outsource the rest. Do what you do best and outsource the rest. And if you like to do things like, and some people like to cook, well, God bless you, that's fine. That means I bet you're a really good cook. And if that's enjoyment and quality time, then sure. But if you're not looking forward to it, then outsource it if you can. Outsource the rest. And that's how you get the most success out of your time. And of course, time is the only irreplaceable resource. So I'll take you through just random quotes that I'm pulling up and my thoughts on them. So first one that comes up is culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that is so true, that I've talked about this a zillion times, that the difference between great companies and ordinary or poor companies, it isn't based on intelligence or experience or education. It's based on the culture. And the culture starts and ends with the attitude of the staff. But you can have the greatest strategy in the world, but if you don't have a culture of putting people first, which includes, first of all, your customers. Our customers pay all the bills. Without customers, we don't need a board of directors, investors, CEOs, chief marketing officers, and we don't need staff without customers. They pay all the bills. So that you have a culture of exceeding customers' expectations. You have to start with a customer of exceeding expectations. And of course, we learned long ago that they began focusing more in the 80s and 90s, that if you're going to have a culture of treating customers best, you need to treat your employees best. And so that's how we came up with the philosophy of happy, successful employees and happy, successful franchisees. If we don't have, and that ends up with getting happy, successful customers. And so that's a culture of how you treat people. You reward people and activity that exceed customers' expectations, and you don't diminish things that hurt or that where you don't meet customers' expectation. And of course, another one of my a recent favorite authors, Stan Phelps, wrote that that you never arrive at a meeting exactly on time. Almost everyone is either late or early. No one, if it's a noon meeting, no one arrives exactly at noon. And in the same way, you never or rarely meet your customer's expectation. So the customer comes in and you either exceed or you fail to meet your customer's expectations. And let me focus on that and on customers' expectations for a minute, because I say that kind of like casually, when without getting into the nitty gritty of customers' expectations. I like to do this little, I like to do this little exercise in front of groups where I'll say to the group, I want you to write a number down, and it can't end in a 5 or a 0. And I want you to tell me, if you go into a restaurant and they sit you at the table, how long would it take, number one, in terms of seconds or minutes? And remember, the answer can't be 10 seconds or 20 or 15 or 15 minutes or two. It can't be 5 minutes. It has to not end in a 5 and not end in a 0. And you'll see why in a second. But and first question is, how long would it take before you began to be irritated if they didn't hand you a menu? Number one. Number two, how long would it take before you got irritated if they didn't give you water? Number three is, how long would it take before you got irritated before they took your order? And so first, irritation. Then how long would it take you you to get up and walk out if they didn't give you a menu? How long would it take if they didn't give you water? And how long would it take if they didn't take your order? Now, the answers are, if you get a group of 20 people, you'll get 17 different answers for those questions. And so you need to understand that the people have different expectations. The expectation of the person next to you, or even your spouse or your best friend, there are different expectations. And some are more impatient than others. Some will wait. I've heard people that will wait 15 minutes. And I'm the opposite. I'm incredibly impatient. But what you begin to understand when you go through that exercise is that people are different, and exceeding expectations for one might not meet another's expectation. And so one of the things that I think and I think I'm even thinking of having this for our convention and our convention next year is something like getting to know you, because I think that as a company we're growing exponentially. We're going to grow 80% this year. Our system-wide revenue is going to grow from 80% this year, and next year it'll grow by another 75 or 80%, and we'll be at $100 million in revenue. And I took two companies Liberty was the highest revenue. We were at $500 million of revenue, and before I left Liberty, but we're on our way at Loyalty Brands, and so we're growing exponentially. But I don't think we do a great job of getting to know anyone. I don't think we know our employees well enough. I don't think we know our franchisees well enough, and I'm certain we don't know our customers well enough. And so I'm thinking of my thought after this exercise on Drucker is, let's do a better job of getting to know everyone and to exceed more and more people's expectations. You can't exceed their expectations without getting to know them. And so I'm going to start an effort right now, and I'm going to talk to the group and see, does that make sense? Is that a good focus for our company and our organization and our executive team on improving? Is that a way to is that one of the most important critical elements of succeeding as a company in the future and growing, meeting and exceeding our own expectations as a group and a company? So I'm going to end with that, and think about that. I'd love to hear any of your thoughts on getting to know you as a theme for next year's convention and next year's goals. And next week, or one time in the future, I will again give you more on Peter Drucker, just the most thoughtful business mind that I've ever read. And he's learned a lot from him, or he's took it right. If I had thought it, I found it amongst his writings eventually. So even if I thought I had invented myself. So having said that, I'll let you go, and hopefully have a great week. We'll talk to you again next week. Thank you, everyone.